Hello and welcome to my shop. The video you're about to watch is the method that I use to prepare acrylic style blanks for turning in my shop. Now this is not the only way to do things, and it may not be the best way to do things, but it's the way that works well for me. I'm hoping that this video will help you get started preparing acrylic style blanks in your shop, and then you can take it and build on it to find the method that works the best in your shop. When I'm preparing an acrylic pen blank for turning, one thing I like to do a little differently than I do on a wood blank is I'll take the tube and I'll align it with the drill bit I'm going to be using, and I'll take a piece of painter's tape and I'll put a little flag on the bit. Now what this allows me to do is when I chuck this bit up in my drill press, I'm going to drill down into this blank, and when the flag meets the blank, I'm going to stop. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a blank that is deep enough to accept the tube, but since I'm going to drill the entire blank before I cut it, I'm not going to have to worry near as much about chip out. The second thing I like to do is we'll go ahead and lay our tube on the blank, and we'll make a hash mark where we want to cut. Now, once we drill, we'll drill from this end all the way through, and we cut this off, we'll have a tube that is perfectly drilled with absolutely no chip out of our acrylic material. I brought my blank over to the drill press and I made sure that the end I marked for the tube is pointing up in my vise. I'm going to lock it down. We're going to find the center. And I just kind of do that by eyeballing. You're going to turn so much of this material away that if you're a little left or a little right, it's probably not going to be a big deal on a solid blank. Now, if you're doing a custom blank or a segmented blank, you want to be a little more particular about finding your center. While drilling, you'll notice that I remove the bit often from the blank, and that is to make sure I clear the flutes of the drill bit. If any material packs into these flutes, it's going to cause additional friction, additional heat, and it can cause your blank to sort of explode and crack. So you definitely want to clear these as often as possible. As soon as your tape flag touches the top of your blank, stop. Taking a quick peek at the blank, you can see we have an entry hole and an exit hole for our tube, and absolutely no chip out on this blank whatsoever. If we take a look at the second half of the blank, you can see where the tip of the bit cut into the blank, but we have a nice section left that we can use to make another pin from. Before you glue your tubes into your blanks, you want to inspect them. Many kits will come with tubes that are pre-scuffed. If you have a tube that is nice and shiny like this one, the first thing you want to do is scuff it up so that the glue has something to adhere to. I like to lay a piece of sandpaper on a nice solid surface. This happens to be the top of my table saw. I simply will hold the blank, swirl it on the sandpaper, and roll it as I swirl it to make sure I get scuffs all the way around the entire surface of the tube. And now we've got something really nice for the glue to adhere to. When you turn an acrylic blank, many times you'll turn the material so thin that you'll be able to see the tube underneath of the material. Notice right there you can kind of see a shadow where I have drilled out this particular blank. What that means is when that blank is thin, you're going to probably see this brass tube. What you can do to avoid that is you can use a little paint. I like to use Tester's paint. This is a model car paint. I get it at the hobby store. I choose a color that is either the same as the blank, or occasionally I'll choose a complementary color. And what it does is hide the tube and really make the blank pop. It gives it a lot more depth of color. Now, most people like to paint the tube. The problem I found with that is when you soak the tube in glue and insert it in the blank, then you turn the blank down thin, you'll see these unsightly marks inside of your blank, which are the dried glue marks. I don't like to see that. So what I like to do is I like to paint the inside of my blank. The way I do that is I'll take a Q-tip and I start by running one end of the Q-tip all the way through the blank and rotating the blank in my hand. The idea behind this is to remove any of the dust inside of the hole that I drilled in the blank. Once I've gone all the way around, I'll flip the Q-tip over to the clean side. I'll open my paint and I'll begin to paint the inside of the tube. Now, if you start at the top, it's going to run down, so be ready for a little bit of a mess. I've got some cardboard on my table here to kind of protect things, but just make sure that you go all the way down through the blank and cover the entire interior surface. I'll flip the blank over. I'll do the same thing from the other side. And you can look down the blank and you can see if there are any spots that do not have paint on them. This blank looks pretty good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the Q-tip down and I'm going to set it on the Q-tip. And the reason why I want the paint to run down the barrel of the tube and drain out the bottom. After a couple of minutes, I'll flip this to the other side of my Q-tip, so that way I get a nice even run. You don't want any globs of paint inside the blank. It'll make it difficult to insert the tube. Now all we do is wait for that paint to dry. We'll inspect it and see if it's going to require a second coat. The paint has had plenty of time to dry, and I've gone ahead and test fit the tube just to make sure there are no obstructions. My glue of choice is medium CA. There are many adhesives that will do a great job. This one just works well for me. I like to apply a liberal amount of glue to the tube. We'll slide it in and out of the blank just enough to spread the glue, and then we'll push it just below the surface. Now we'll set it aside to dry. The next step in the process is to trim the ends of the blank flush with the tube, being very careful to keep the faces flat and perpendicular to the tube. For that, I'm going to use my sanding jig. My blank has now been trimmed flush with the tube, and there's one last step I like to do with acrylic before I take it to the lathe. This final step is not entirely necessary. This blank could go to the lathe as is, and it would turn just fine. One of the things I worry about with some acrylic style blanks is the material can be somewhat brittle. So what that means is when the tool hits this corner and the blank is spinning, it can chip. Sometimes if you take a large enough chip, you can damage your blank fairly severely. So I like to use this little jig and just cut the corners off of my blank. this blank is truly ready for the lathe, and we shouldn't have to worry about any issues with chipping as the tool strikes the blank.